can't say that I'm embarrassed because I know that I'm doing the right thing.
Now, Mr. Depp, I'd like to turn a bit to your upbringing. We heard a bit from your sister Christy last week, but can you please tell the jury in your own words about your childhood upbringing?
I had a very interesting childhood, one that I thought was normal until a certain age. My mother, I was born in Kentucky, and then we moved, in which we moved around quite a lot when I was a kid. So you were always just, my mom had this, her feet were on fire and she had to move, so we moved constantly. So you were always the new kid, and that wasn't ever particularly pleasant. Then we moved to Florida, South Florida, when I was about 7 or 8. And again, moved several times. But my mother was quite unpredictable. She was very unpredictable. She was she had the ability to be as cruel as anyone can be with all of us. That is to say, my sister Christy and my brother Danny and my sister Debbie, and also my father. So, essentially, she could become quite violent, and she was quite violent, and she was quite cruel, and though there was physical abuse, certainly, which could be in the form of an ashtray being flung at you, it hits you in the head, or you'd get beat with a high-heel shoe or a telephone or whatever's handy. So in our house, we were never exposed to any type of safety or security. The only thing that one could do, really, was to try to stay out of the line of fire. I started to be able to observe, and I could start to see when she was about to head into a situation where she was going to get riled up and somebody was going to get it. Generally, it was me.
Mr. Depp, you mentioned that your mother could be cruel. How could she be cruel?
Well, the various categories, I suppose, there's physical violence, of course, there's physical abuse, to which she was, that was a constant. That was just a constant, We were all somewhat shell-shocked, even if she just walked past us, you'd sort of shield yourself because you didn't know what was going to happen. Excuse me. And so there was the physical abuse, which was a constant. There was quite a lot of verbal abuse. There was quite a lot of name calling and bullying. Making fun of whatever defect one might have. If my brother wore glasses, so of course he was four eyes, and his teeth were messed up in the front, so he was buck-toothed as well. My sister Christy, which this is such a hideous psychological play. My father's parents were quite refined. My mother comes from Eastern Kentucky, which is where you grow up in shacks and hollers, you know. And my mother despised my father's parents, and my grandmother's name was Violet, and every now and again you would hear my mother just scream across the house, "Come here, Violet, get in here, Violet." And Christy, my sister, knew very well that that was a deep cut, psychologically, emotionally, but we had to take it. I mean, you just had to take the pain. I was born with a very strange, it was a very rare thing in my eye, as the back of the lens is spherical. Normally is spherical, so in this eye it isn't normal. This eye, I was born with a more conical lens, so my brain never learned to see out of my left eye, and they noticed when I was about 3, 4, that I had a lazy eye, a wandering eye, and she would call me cockeye, one eye, anything she could get to demean, humiliate. I even had to wear an eye patch on my good eye to strengthen my bad eye, so that it would cease to wander. It was exercising the muscles of the eye, though the brain had never learned to see. So I still, my vision in my left eye is, I'm legally blind in my left eye. But so yeah, the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse, was almost worse than the beatings, because the beatings were just physical pain, and the physical pain you learn to deal with, you learn to accept it, you learn to deal with it. But the psychological and emotional abuse, that's what kind of tore us up, I think.
What about your father? What was he like?
My father was a very kind man. In fact, my father's still alive. He's a very kind man. He's a very quiet man. In fact, he's very shy. Not a confrontational person in any way. And when Betty Sue, my mother, would go off on a tangent toward my father, and of course in front of the kids it was no matter to her. He amazingly remained very, very stoic, and never, as she was rationing him with horrible things, he stood there and just looked at her while she delivered the pain, and he swallowed it. He took it. There was never one moment, never a moment when my father lost control and attacked my mother or hit my mother or even said a bad thing to my mother. The things that I witnessed were, there were a couple of times when it got too far, that I could see his eyes welling up as he was staring at her, saying nothing. And then the most that he would do is he would punch a wall. I once saw him punch a wall and shatter his hand because it wasn't drywall. It was proper concrete and steel wire and rebar and things of that nature. And but still, never touched her, never argued with her. He remained a gentleman, and to me, as a 5-year-old boy, I kept thinking to myself, I kept wondering why does he take it? How does he take this? And why doesn't he leave her? But he didn't, he was able to maintain his calm and his composure. He was able to maintain his relationship with his children. He was a good man. He is a good man.
You mentioned that you saw your father punch a wall. How many times did you witness that?
I mean, out of I couldn't count the amount of fights that they had, but I know that I've seen my father strike a wall 2 or 3 times tops. Once when he broke his hand, but yeah, 2-3 times at tops.
Was your father ever abusive to you or any of your siblings?
No, my father was never. My father was not an abusive man. At the same time, my father was also, to some degree, at the mercy of Betty Sue, because if he argued with what she wanted done, that would just turn into another barrage of hatred towards him. So I can remember my father coming home from work, and maybe I'd gotten a bad report card, or maybe I'd gotten in trouble at school, or something like that. And my father would arrive home from work, and the first thing she would say was, "John, take him out there. He gets the belt. Give him the belt." And he wanted to know what it was about, so he'd take me out to the garage, and I'll never forget this white, thick leather 1970s era, thick leather white belt that he would take off, and then he would commence to inflict the punishment on me. But interestingly, there was one time when my father, I kept telling him I didn't do this. It was another incident. I kept swearing to him that I did not do what Betty Sue, what my mom had said that I'd done. But he went through with the punishment anyway. And then, not long after, he found out that I had been telling the truth and that I hadn't done what my mom had said that I'd done. And he came to me and apologized to me for having gone through with the whipping, you know, the belt. And I have to say, my mom never did that. She couldn't. She knew what she knew. She was raised how she was raised. And I had no power to change what was inside of her, you know.
How did your parents' relationship ultimately come to an end, to your understanding?
When my father left, I didn't realize that he had left. He left for, I was 15. I had already left school, and I was a musician. I was playing in clubs and such. And he left for work one morning, just like every day, and was packing his car, and then he left. And then hours later, my mom, Betty Sue, came home from work. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon. And she walked in the door and stopped and just looked around like she felt something. And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Your daddy's gone." I said, "Well, yeah, I seen him leave for work this morning." She said, No, he's gone. And she ran into their bedroom and into their closet, and I followed her, and she opened the door, and there was his rack of clothing and all his belongings were gone. And she was quite upset, and I took her car and drove to my father's work, and I sat down in front of him at 15, and I said, "Listen, seems as though somebody stole all your clothes out of the closet." And he said, yeah. He said, "I'm done. I can't do it anymore. I can't live it anymore. You're the man now." And those words didn't quite sit well with me. I didn't feel like I was ready to hear those words. But that's what I got. Then my mom went into a very, very dark place, a very deep, dark depression, as you can imagine. And one afternoon I woke up, I'd fallen asleep, and I woke up and walked out into the living room, and I saw my mother, very feebly, and like almost, it was like a slow motion crawl. If I could stand up, I could show you just what I saw. Do you mind?
No, you can stand up.
Thank you. I saw my mother, you know, in that mode. So instantly, I knew that something was dreadfully wrong, and there's drool coming out of her mouth. And as I was about to run and call, the front door busted open, and my uncle and two paramedics came in and threw her on the gurney and whisked her out of house to get her to the hospital to pump her stomach. She had swallowed a multitude of pills to try to take herself out, to try to commit suicide. And when she got out of the hospital, she was a small firecracker of a woman. She was about 5'2". But when she got out of the hospital, the depression was so deep. She was down to, like, she lived on the couch and she weighed about 70 pounds. And that, all that imagery spun into my head at that time, that I thought that was a very, in my head at the time, I thought that that was a cowardly way for my father to have left. And I was deeply upset by that. Until my father and I had a conversation years later, where I asked him what really happened, how did it happen when I was older, and he told me the story.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Sure.
Mr. Depp, how did you feel about your father when he left?
I was very disappointed in him, because I started to believe that his exit was sneaky, cowardly. He didn't, when he said goodbye to me, when he left for work that morning, he just said goodbye, goodbye, Bob, see you later, Pop, that was it. Until I learned the truth from him.
And without getting into what your father told you, how has your impression of your father changed now?
Objection, relevance.
Your Honor, this is just an understanding of his perception of his family.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Mr. Depp, what have you learned from your experience in your childhood and observing your father in your childhood?
I learned that I was wrong about my first impressions of his exit from the family. Very wrong. And I'll tell you one thing that I learned that was one of the best lessons I believe I've ever learned in my life, ever could learn in my life, was based on my experiences as a child and what I'd seen and experienced. I knew exactly how to raise children. When my girl Vanessa got pregnant, I knew exactly how to raise children, which was to do the opposite of what they did, of what Betty Sue did. Never raise your voice in front of the children, never. Screaming out the word no to them. I never wanted to tell my kids no. I wanted to tell them that I wanted to show them that there were options. You don't have to stick the coat hanger in the electrical socket. You know, saying no is an abrupt thing, but to talk to them and say, if you understand the repercussions of something, then you won't go there.